First, I want to thank everybody for coming in and taking time out and joining. First webinar on a publication. So this was the third publication by the Middle Road OPC Private Limited, and this is the third publication, but the first webinar on the publication. So I thought, as best business practices, let me take a webinar on. Okay, so let's start. I'll take the presentation. So what we'll do is I'll go through the presentation, and at the end of the presentation, we'll take questions. So this is live as well as recorded. So hello everybody, my name is Nishant Malhotra. I'm the founder of Middle Road OPC Private Limited and the Middle Road. OPC is a one-person company. So this is I'm taking a webinar on my the third publication, which is the Inequality Conundrum Pathways Ahead for India. So we'll start with a brief introduction of what the Middle Road is about. So let me know anytime, just to give you a very brief introduction. The Middle Road is divided sort of in three. It's like an online platform. It's got e-publication online platform where you have research-focused articles, insights. You have a bit of global bites, you have publications, you have podcasts. I interview leading social enablers around the world, and we had some very famous, very prominent guests like Anu Aga, Mr. Ramanan. We also had Ruchi Mathur, among others. So I also interviewed Dr. V. Premnath. So that is a part of the Middle Road part. The second part is what the EdTech, which sort of overlaps, which is EdTech I'm building in education space. And the third is consulting, which predominantly within the social ecosystem and knowledge management. So just to tell you a brief about who I am, my name is Nishant Malhotra. I passed out from University of Michigan, Jared Ford School of Public Policy. I did my Master of Public Administration. I had done before that, I'd gone to China. I had gone to one of the leading business schools around the world, China Europe International Business School. So I had done my MBA there. It's based in Shanghai. I had done my exchange at Nanyang Business School, Singapore. Then I went to, before that, I had done my Master of Public Administration from one of the leading schools in India, Symbiosis Institute of Business Management. It's in Pune, India, where I briefly taught one course in portfolio management and investment analysis. I was a visiting professor for one course there, and I taught in a couple of institutes. Before that, I completed my bachelor's from Vishwakarma Institute of Technology, Pune. Now, I've worked for about 8 years in India, predominantly, especially in financial services. But I've worked I've worked in banks. I worked in multinational consumer goods company, L'Oreal. I was with a technology company, a global technology company headquartered in Pune. And also I worked a bit in the education sector. So with this, we start with the presentation. So when I talked about inequalities, the whole idea was to understand what's happening in India and around the world. Why are we so unequal in life? Why is there unequal on wealth? And what was the broad level policies which are predominantly being introduced in India? So it started with the Moody's research paper, which I was reading, and then I thought, let's go deep, do a deep dive. So ultimately, although the presentation or the publication is very exhaustive, it's not very in-depth in certain sectors. So its idea is to understand on a broader level what was happening in India, both globally, why there is inequalities in wealth, and also specifically with a focus in India. So when we are going to be discussing this presentation, we look at inequalities in wealth. We look at Gini coefficient. That's one of the measures which I've used. Then we look at what are the leading countries, why India is one of the leading countries in tax avoidance. We look at what is the asymmetries in taxation, what are the asymmetries in labor market, what are the asymmetries in agriculture sector, and the structural changes in the employment sector. So we'll be looking at a bit of recommendations. We'll ultimately go to the debt market. So it will cover all aspects of the Indian ecosystem. So we are looking at predominantly job market. We are looking at the sectors. we look at employment, and then we're also looking at sustainable sector, and we're looking at predominantly the capital markets, where also I had looked up in depth. I mean, had a overlooking paper in that. So we look at first the Gini coefficient. So India is one of the highest now. If you look at this graph, so when I'm this particular color was orange color. Actually, this is the Gini coefficient. What it shows is like a multiplied by 100. So Gini coefficient is between 0 to 1. It goes from 0 to 100 because it's multiplied by 100 to show you. So what we see is how the Gini coefficient is moving predominantly over the years. I see what is the, if you see on the blue chart, you get to see the percentage of national wealth. Now, how much is the percentage shared by the top 1%? So if you look at this is selectively, so Russia is one of the most unequal countries, followed by Brazil, India, United States. So these are some of the selective countries I've taken. However, what it shows is like, if you look at the universally, the top 1% of the population hold about 44% of the global wealth, down from 46.4% in 2000. So globalization, although has helped, it has not helped the way it was supposed to happen. So why has this happened? So we look at some of the reasons when we look at, we go down in India. Now, when we look at the lower half of the population owns less than 1% of the global wealth. So this is the sort of an unequal wealth distribution. So unequal wealth distribution always creates social unrest. It sort of impedes the well-being of any country or any economy or any nation. So we also see the wealthiest 10% own 82% of all the wealth. So when we look at India, now this is taken from Credit Suisse 2019 report and Oxfam, whenever specifically the Indian figures. The top 10% of the Indian population holds 77% of the national wealth. So this is something which is very, interesting and also very disturbing. So this is one of the most disturbing news which I had, and I wanted to highlight it. And we go forward and we look at this more exhaustive when you look at the publication. So now I come to the first part. We look at the income tax revenues. So one of the inequalities which we see is basically the tax avoidance. So the tax avoidance, when we look at separately, when we look at India, we look at it. But if you look at the broader level, India has one of the lowest tax revenues as a percent of the GDP. So if you look at the figures, it hovers between 9 to 10% or about 9%, whereas the global average is about 49%, according to World Bank, looking at 2018 data. So if you look at some of the more countries which are very even, for example, Sweden, you look at it, had a very high taxation. It has got a very high taxation rate, especially when we're talking about taxation structure, we're talking about marginal taxation structure. That is, your taxation structure keeps going up as you earn more amount of money or wealth, as we call it. So if you look at in India, and I mean, if you look at this, in the report also, I've said this taxation structure across the world has started coming down. Even, countries have started cutting out progressive taxation structure. However, what is lacking in India is a lack of progressive taxation covering especially the rich and the super rich segment of the population. So whenever I'm talking about rich, I'll talk about actually people with, investors with the HNI with the investor surplus of $1 million. When you're talking about super rich, there's a lot of variation. It could be $30 million plus. Some people will say $5 million plus, $100 million plus. So we'll not go into that, but we're saying is there's a lag. So one of the simple reasons is, like, if you look at India, roughly the highest tax bracket is about $20,000. So that sort of gives you a perspective of why the broader net is not getting marginally taxed high. And one of the reasons also for this tax inequalities is like we have a higher indirect taxation structure. So there was a research done, and it was seen that the indirect taxation is very regressive mode of taxation for redistribution of wealth. So that is not a very good way of redistributing your wealth. So one of the core recommendations was have a wider marginal tax bracket, specifically for millionaires. You keep going up and you start taxing it higher. You have a reduction of indirect taxation. This you can be talking about GST could be put in maybe just 2 slabs or 1 slab, sort of, putting it down. You increase long-term tax rate to 4 years from 2 years for housing. So that's missed out. So if for housing, whenever you're talking about, we can. So this is one of the ideas, is like when you keep buying houses in India, one of the black money, India's got a huge amount of black money market. So that could be as high as a parallel amount of money. So when we are talking about when you keep buying houses, so you're buying out additional house properties. These needs to be taxed with a higher taxation rate. So the whole idea is to sort of dissuade one, speculation within the property market. Second is like the marginal property tax, as it increases, is because the marginal value of a house keeps decreasing as you bring about houses. Like, so rich people only are going to be actually buying the houses. They are not going to be, it's not core house for living purposes. So this was one of the focus areas, and why the taxation given. Now, when we look at the taxation, so this is one of the very important, when we look at some of the core things. In a country of 1.3 million people, we have only 57.8 million people filled with the file for tax, and about that, about 8,600 Indians registered salaries above 5 crores. So I've I think taken the measure as about $1 to 75 INR, and about 2,200 are above 1 crore. So now this is predominantly 1% of the Indians own about 45% of the total wealth in India. So this is one of the most disturbing trends coming in, and this is actually one of the biggest de-enablers for any country which wants to progress. So that is one of the core highlights. So when we look at now tax revenue, one of the core recommendation is like what I talked about, wider tax make reduction. You also increase corporate tax rate. That's one of the suggestions, is just to increase corporate tax rate to 30% from, down from up from 25%. This is one of the core reasons, is like this is going to be a major enabler in terms of getting revenues for the government. So this is one of the fair ideas. It's not a very high tax rate. It's taken as a moderate of 30%. So we come to now asymmetry. So one of the things is, we looked at, one is the income redistribution, which is so asymmetrical. So one of the why is this happening? So when we go deep into the surface and we look at that, one, the labor market. Now about 90% of the labor market in India is in unorganized sector. Now that is a huge problem. We have about 450 million people in labor market. So this is the estimates which I got from the World Bank. This is by 2019. So if 250 million people are in labor market, 10% is only in organized sector. Now that becomes a huge problem. Out of that 10%, majority of the people are in agriculture sector. And we look at this again as a economy. When you break it up between agriculture, you're bringing manufacturing and services. So you see agriculture is actually accounting for 43.21% of the total employment in India, but only 15% of that is linked to the GDP in 2019. So that's a huge a bottleneck, if you look at, because when you're and as we look forward, when you're in organized sector, you practically open to a lot of exploitation. So now when we look at the next slide, I'm talking about asymmetries, and we look at the agriculture sector. Now India has got, if you look at the comparison between as you progress, the agricultural land comes down. So if you look at in India, although we have one of the highest operation holdings in the world in terms of agriculture holdings, 87% of the land holdings are with marginalized communities. So if you look at the average holding sector, when I'm talking about marginalized sector, I'm looking at the average holding less than 2 hectares. Now if you look at the average holding in India is just 1 hectare. So that is a huge because it again opens to exploitation. You don't have the best practices. There's a lot of wastage within the system. So going forward, when we look at the in-depth some of the findings within the agriculture sector, we see 67% of the land holdings is less than 1 hectare. Now, if you look at the global average, which is 12%, and which is actually under 2 hectares. So if I take the figure of 2 hectares, it could go wide range much more widely. Now, 50% of the farmlands have no access to irrigation facilities, which is like a huge problem. 5.2 of the agriculture households in India have no access to tractors, 1.8% to power tiller, and so just to give 1.6% to just have drip irrigation. Now, when you're looking at households, just 32.2% of the agriculture households are educated, and only 4.6, which is about roughly we can say approximately 5%, will have just a diploma or a graduate degree. And what is very interesting, which is now when we look at the inequalities within the Indian system, we look at the so-called globalization. So Himanshu, you should refer the paper, did a study, and what it's come out is that the majority of even the sort of upside which has come even in the unorganized, or you can say the rural sector, is skewed towards the managers. So this is so ultimately, even the farmers or the rural workers in non-farm sector, missed out majorly in the boom which we have seen in the last 20 years in India. So when we look at another disturbing trend is like a huge amount of debt. So about roughly just a little bit less than 50% of the households, especially in the rural sector, have exposed to debt. So this becomes a huge problem and a bottleneck. If, you are not able to be very productive. You're open to basically exploitation. You're not within the safety bracket of the economy. Now, when we look at this asymmetries, how can we tackle it? One of the core reasons, now what the Indian government has been doing, and which is a good step, is been using land leasing as a mode to give out land leases to farmers. But what I have suggested in the report is like we buy back the lands at market rates. This is not only from, you could either allot it at market rates to in a very open up lottery system to farmers, so that they can have buy back the land. You can also, when you're buying from marginalized farmers, you can have make sure that they have alternative careers. So this could help you a lot in terms of making sure that you could give above market rates for the land, to make sure that they have an alternative career. Otherwise you don't go and buy that land. So the whole idea is to prepare land and increase the shareholding of the farmers. Now, one of the most brilliant ideas which I've connected here is how to bring down the debt levels of the farmers. There are two ways you can do, which is, one is to get microfunding going. Now, there are a lot of major players. Grameen is been doing a lot, Kiva has done this. So this is sort of a bit motivated by the Kiva model worldwide, whereas you start a national peer-to-peer micro lending, whereas people can lend and lend for free. For example, I have a marginalized farmers, I want to help him. I can open through the peer-to-peer network. One person, you have an intermediary, so that there's full accountability, and that would be a framework put in by the Indian government. You can also have marketplace for it if you want, but looking at way below market rates or even free, you can give free capital to farmers who are really marginalized. So it will bring their debt burden down. It will give them the required capital to increase their holdings. The whole idea is to bring down the debt of the farmers and to increase their holdings, so that they have the best practices in the agriculture sector. They get best access to equipment. They could have tractors, and the best thing in the technology to be more productive. This bring down waste and will bring more productive. Now, the other is blended capital. Now, blended capital I've repeatedly talked about. Blended capital is when you're using a mix where basically you could get private players to invest in projects, specifically in the rural sector of marginalized communities, in the healthcare, in the agriculture sector. So you can take the first loss of guarantees. The first loss of guarantee is taken by the government, and then you have private players. IFC has been doing a remarkable job in this sector. So blended capital has been rising around the world. India has been also very innovative. Usually we call it a mix of concessionary and non-concessionary capital, wherein you take the first loss of risk. the first loss of risk is taken by the government, and then you have private players who come in and who help. So this is one way of also attracting private capital for the marginalized community. Now, so this is one of the prime ways. The other way which I was thinking is to make CSR compulsory. Nowadays in India, it's mandatory to have allot certain amount of your revenues depending on certain parameters to the CSR. You can also make CSR mandatory, a portion of the CSR among companies towards helping the marginalized community. Specifically, when I'm talking about marginalized farmers. So we're targeting the rural community. Now, when you compare it, and as we go forward, I'll bring out another very critical insight of why I have gone ahead, why I've talked about this particular initiative. So so when we talk and we make an analysis before we go to Make in India. Now, if you look at China's tremendous growth, one of the reasons is China has about very close to 70% of the population has been urbanized. Now in India, you look at, I think the figure is about 33% by 2018. If I take even 35% value, we are still way behind. So one of the reasons why, which is impeding, is like urbanization. And I think this way, when you increase the holdings of the land, you also create an alternative careers for people who are marginalized, so that they could go and either have a vocational training, so that they could also go to cities and have a livelihood. Which we see migrants, workers as one of the major communities. So we have about 40 to 50 million migrants who come from different states to work in the cities. And so now we come to Make in India. The reason why I went to Make in India was a couple of things. Is like, because we'll be talking about the manufacturing sector, we'll be looking at sectoral structures. So when you're looking at a structural overview of an economy, it's very important to look at some of the policies. So one of the policies started by the present Indian government was to focus predominantly in the manufacturing sector. So of course it was to increase the manufacturing sector to 25% by 2020, and if I'm not wrong, to get at least 100 million jobs by 2022. Now if we look at the trend, India has a strong forte in terms of manufacturing, but if you look at the manufacturing GDP as a percentage of GDP is only 14.82. so that is where it is. So we have missed that mark. And according to what's very interesting is, like, if you look at the World Economic Forum has said the manufacturing value added has increased only 7% over the last 3 decades. Now that's a very troubling figure. We have also, if you look at India as a 3% of the manufacturing share, the global share we say, which is 3%, we have a global position of 6%, 6th position as from the rankings which I have. Now, there was also an analysis done by World Economic Forum with A.T. Kearney, and they came out with a report in 2018. And in that, India was ranked 30th in structure of production, and 44th in drivers of production. So if you look at how we have been compared, you will see that we come into the quadrant which is known as the legacy. Basically, we have a strong current base, but we are still at risk of future risk. So this is a huge point of concern. If we want to make a world-class manufacturing hub, I think as we go forward, we need to be very high on these parameters. So when we look at why just to sort of give you a fair bit of comparison of certain countries. So before I start, I hope, are you able to see the presentation? Am I audible? And yes, okay. So I could open for questions till now. If anybody wants to ask a question, so that it becomes much more interactive, because I'll keep talking, and there are quite a few more slides. So I would welcome any thoughts, any questions, both from Kapil and now we have Amit also. So Amit, if you have, let me know. You can always write down your questions here. Sorry, I didn't let you know. There's also a question place where you can put in, or you can just raise your hand, or you can just put anything in the chat box. I'll immediately take it. What we'll do is, like, I'll go to 3 more slides and again open up the floor, so that it becomes very interactive. Otherwise, if you wait till the end, I think that's going to become that the whole webinar will become asymmetrical then. So I'll just open up the floor. I'll wait. If you have questions, it is great. We'll go ahead. I'll just go ahead now. So we come to Make in India. Let's look at R&D. Now, percentage of GDP, if we see the R&D expense, if you look at the countries, India is at one of the lowest, and that share has been predominantly going down. So if you look from 2011 to 2018, there has been a 27.7% drop. We are just 0.6% of our GDP. We are actually investing in R&D expenses. Now, this is way much lower if you want to put up a structure. So I've given you fair comparison of some of the very important countries in manufacturing. As a matter of fact, Thailand is according to the report was a very interesting country. If you look at ASEAN, even ASEAN is investing a lot. You have Malaysia, which is very well equipped. We have Thailand. We have Vietnam, which is coming up. Singapore, of course, is the very dominant powerhouse, predominantly in both in services and a lot of manufacturing industries. So now what is the problem is what I core realized is the GDP. We need to increase this, and of course one of the core recommendations is that over a period of time we should increase this to 2% of the GDP. Now, the other initiative which the Indian government has taken, which is also a forward-looking step, is National Automotive Testing and R&D Infrastructure, where they are going to be investing about $500 million. Now, that is good, but I think you need to have by far more amount of capital to be investing in. So one of the reasons when you look at, and we'll go to slow model when we come to an end, why I'm saying this is India has got a huge population. It's got about 65% of the people less than 35 years of age. Now we are adding about 8 to 12 million people, workforce, in every year. So when you're going to be, you want people to be employed, you need to have a concept known as capital. So this is what the Magdos we talked about that equation. But when we are looking at, we'll look at that in the end. Right now, we'll then look at very interesting industry which is coming is engineering, R&D, globalization, and services. Now, these are the major, which is like not a very capital intensive industry. It is more human capital intensive. This industry is limited to artificial intelligence, MI. This includes augmented reality. This includes all the blockchain, the sort of technology which India could, embedded software, VLSI. So these are the industries where India, in one of the reports of NASSCOM, what it said that we are more engineers in 7 of the top selected industries in this particular department than anywhere in the world. Yet we are not making a huge impact. So even the way we go, we had a market share of about $22.3 billion in 2016, and even if we reach by $100 billion, according to Zinov, we still be about 4.5% of the $2.2 trillion market. So we are losing a dominant position in this particular sector. Now, when we look at Make in India enablers, one of the key enablers is, which I talked about, it is increase the R&D spend to 2% of the GDP. Now, one of the reasons why the Make in India is not going in, although there was a insolvency and bankruptcy code launch in 2016, which was actually one of the major reforms done by the government of India, and which was a very good step in right direction. Still, the bankruptcy coding, the insolvency coding is still, we have a way more time to create a ecosystem. Now, this ecosystem, we need to bring in more business friendly labor laws. So if we, just to give you a comparison of Deloitte, now, of course, India has improved, as a matter of fact, India has improved considerably over this time. But if you look at the timeline, so it takes India in terms of insolvency case, so it takes about 5 years for the creditors to get back, and what they're going to get back is about 26% of the recovery. Whereas in China, and if you compare OECD, which is collection of high income countries, it's about 1.7 years. But of course, 73% goes in OECD, whereas about 36.9% it goes in China. So what we are looking at it, at least, it's the in terms of the timelines, it is much simpler in countries which have very high manufacturing basis. Now, this will take time. It's a work in progress. It'll take some time, but things have started moving in. Now we'll to have a strong healthcare facilities. We invest one of the lowest in the world. Our as a percentage of GDP, India invests about roughly approximately 3% of the GDP into healthcare services, into healthcare facilities. Now that is one of the lowest. So you need to have a world-class infrastructure, which is why I have in the presentation talked about bringing in private partnerships to get the ball rolling, which the Indian government has done. But I think this has to be done at a very higher scale. We need to have more reforms for intellectual property rights. The worldwide governance indicators has just given us a mediocre ranking, in spite of India going up in ease of business. Now, one of the major spaces which we could attract is, which I've very strongly argued, is smartphones, because the smartphones, India is roughly about, according to one of the studies, about 500 plus million users, and about 70% odd of them have got wireless access. So we have 12.5% of the global markets, of the share of global markets, and it's going to go to 33.3% by 2021. Now that is a remarkable feature. Now, of course, in India, it's dominated by Chinese phones, but I think this is where a lot of FDI could come in, because it makes sense. You get a market share, you're faster to market, you get more consumer insights, you can predominantly play on price, because India is a very price sensitive market. When you're getting supply chain in India, of course, the mobile phones are going to be even much more cheaper. So that's one of the reasons why even Samsung has opened one of the markets. Now, I've talked about space technology. I think space technology is where we could go in. Defense, which have come on late, we are going, and we have gone in, like I talked about. Yeah, that's true. I read that. So when we are looking at, focus on space technology and VLSI, Intel has opened its second center in Bangalore. But we need to have a tech transfer. We need to start making, going up higher end in the manufacturing. We need to make world-class products. We need to be more product focused. And for that, I've already spoken about the part of being in embedded software. We being in cloud computing, we need to be sort of focused blockchain, AI. So these are the industries which are maybe not very capital intensive, but very human capital intensive, which we have a competency in that, and we can use it. But we need to be proactive in that particular space. Now we come to the employment sector. So one of the, if you look at the asymmetries within the Indian system now, which is one of the major focus areas which you are talking about, which is structural changes we need, is the services. Now, services industry accounts about 49% of the GDP in India, close to about 50%, but it only is employing 31.9% of the employees. Now that is a major hurdle. So you have the number one industry which is creating a lot of GDP for you, a lot of wealth for you, a lot of income for you, but you don't have, it's not employing the sort of number of employees which it should be happening. So services is predominantly one of the fortes which India is good in it, and it should build in. So this service is not only for software services, it's across the board services. It could be financial services, pharmaceutical services. So this is one sector which India needs to do. I talked about agriculture sector. So one of the major recommendations is like you increase the employment in the services sector, you increase the employment in the manufacturing sector, which is going to bring the employment in the agriculture sector down. The whole point is you got to move the pie from the unorganized sector to the organized sector. That is the only way you will be able to march ahead, because you're going to bring people, first of all, in the whose payments are going to be recorded. They are not going to be open to exploitation. They will get some kind of medical services which are going to be free, and you are predominantly creating wealth from them so that they rise in wealth at one point of time, and they ultimately come over a period of time, earn money, and can also come into the taxable bracket. Taxable bracket, whenever I'm talking about, is because I want them to progress over a period of time, over a period of years, so that there is a concrete focus that they are earning a sustainable earning, which is also increasing over a period of time. India, one of the key sectors which is emerging around the world is sustainable sector. The point is, even the World Economic Forum report, when it sort of marked you on various parameters, it did not mark India very high on sustainable sector. So which is a huge worry, so that's a huge worry which you need to look at it. So one of the recommendations which I've given a direct figure. Let's take it to 40% in the services sector as a percentage of the GDP. Now you're going to be increasing that by about 8% the GDP increases, but then also so that's a very good target which Indian government could look at. You increase the focus on manufacturing circle. You already have a focus, but then you have a more focus towards the sectors which I have talked about. You bring in more product-based startups. Healthcare has been there. Fintech has become a major, startup. Cloud computing has always been there. So online education will be having a renewed focus. So these are certain sectors which can contribute a lot to not only GDP, but they will be able to employ people, because those are industries which people could really move in. And a lot of these industries where you employ people might not need very high skill sets. Vocational training would be good enough. For example, in hospital space, we don't have so many hospitals. Now look at a lot of people in the clerical staff. You're giving them a job. You're giving them an income. So, these are the things, and it does not require a very high set of skill sets. So nowadays, when we are talking about online computing, I talked about Uttar, I talked about quite a few companies. So they are able to sort of go in and train blue collared workers. That's where the segment is, which you can train them not only on through courses, but you could do online. So that's it. So one of the major recommendations now which has come from India, which I've come in and looked at the figures which came on from the Moody's, is that the Indian government debt is at 72% of the GDP. Now that's very high. That's about 30% higher than the average of sovereign rating which we had. Now the interest payments alone are going to 23%. Now we have a huge problem with terms of interest rates. Why not go for a zero coupon bond? Now zero coupon bond, you don't have to pay coupons. Coupons means interest rates on bonds. So zero coupon bond is given at a discount of a face value. So when we talk about bonds, face value is for example, let's say I have a company, I come out with bonds in the capital markets. I want to raise funding. So one way to go is to go to the capital markets through bonds. So the bonds will have a face value. Let's say it's about 100 INR. Now, just to give you an example, and I'm going to pay let's say, to make it very simple, annualized coupon, which is interest rate of 7 to 8%. We're just taking as a simple example. Now, if I have an interest pay government, so we are talking about the Indian government here. So Indian government can go, which is the sovereign bonds, and go and get funding from not only from the private sector, it goes globally, and the different governments would be actually paying, buying the bonds. Now, Indian government will always have to pay a coupon, which is the interest rate. Instead of that, zero coupon bonds are discount bonds, discounted to their face value, and you come out with those bonds. So let's say if it's I go and raise $20 billion for a 30-year period, I could give it a discount of 18 to 17, and I would, of course, at the point of redeeming, would pay the difference. Now, what you get is you get a lot of time for you not to be paying first. You don't have to pay periodic coupons. What you can do is you can always have rolling over zero coupon bonds when you go out, so that whenever you need to pay, you'll have the cash flows to pay them again. Now, the thing is good positive for India is India's got forex reserve. So one of the reasons why somebody might have a risk of investing in India for a zero coupon bond would be that rupee could depreciate. But we have forex reserves, which is known as, we have something known as dirty float. We can always interfere in the international markets and stem the depreciation of Indian rupees. And we can, of course, hedge risk through non-deliver forwards. Now, non-deliver forward is something which I've talked about. What India could do is, like, a lot of companies have done it. So Indian government, the RBI, has not done it for a very long period of time. They have not come out with a zero coupon bond since 1997. However, state governments have started coming out. So I think this is one bond route which I pretty much think would really help the Indian government to go out, to come out and raise capital through this market route. So now we come to what is basically the last slide, where I've talked about, we have covered the mindset problem. We've not been able to give a sustainable push. To give an example, even when we have come on to renewable energy space, I mean, if you look at just a global comparison, by 2018 figures, China dominated by 45% of the 45% of the global fleet of electric vehicles till 2018 was in China, just to give an example. And then you had Euro at 24% and US at 22%. So if we need to, have a focus, we need to have a huge, if you're going to be having basically policies like FAME, which is, giving a huge thrust to the electric vehicle sector or to renewable space, we need to have a market. We need to have people buying that. We need to have an infrastructure, which is in many ways coming in, through various innovations now, through battery swapping technology and all. But still, we need to have a persistent push there. I've talked about putting up public-private partnerships, especially in infrastructure. We can do land leasing. That is something which Indian government could, do it in a major way, which if they feel this is good. We need to increase our spending on healthcare, especially after COVID. It's pretty much clear that India needs to spend a lot on healthcare, because these are the hygiene factors which are very important if you want to attract foreign direct investment. And when you're talking about foreign direct investment, I'm talking not about capital markets. I'm talking about industries coming and setting up factories, industries coming and setting up R&D centers in India. So just to give you a word. So we need to have a very positive push in sustainable development sector. We need to focus on tech transfers. Given up, we need to have educative initiatives. So one of the very good initiatives which I've seen is done by Atal Tinkering Labs, going to schools and getting that innovation done within kids. There's a lot of hackathons. In one of my podcast, I mean, I've interviewed Mr. Raman and also talked to Virendra. So, these hackathons, when you're going in, you're getting people to go, especially kids at a very early age, towards the experimental side. So that's one of the major things which is missing. I mean, today's India's generation of students are by far more practically oriented than the time which I came in. So that is what I think is predominantly needed for India. So with this, I come to an end of the, presentation. I'm very open to questions. Please do ask me anything which I could help you out with. First, I want to thank you. Thank you for, see, yeah, okay. So I'll take the Kapil from, it's a question from Kapil. So he's talked about, okay, so he has given quite a few questions. How do you see the new national policy enabling transfer of pie from unorganized? So very frankly, I've not gone in depth on this education policy. So I could, read it and I can get back to you. Now, if India wants to be self-reliant in defense production, how do you see this filling the inequality from making it? So when I'm talking about inequality, so one of the things is when you're talking about defense sector, you're actually going to be in anything which you're going to be doing in defense sector is going to be very capital intensive. So you'll be putting in factories, and so this is one part which is going to be employing blue collared workers. So what it goes to get is whichever way you're going in a capital intensive industry. So there are two intensive industries which you talked about. Either you go in a very capital intensive industry, which could be one of them, which could be defense production. When you are going to that industry, you are creating a lot of jobs both from blue and white collared people. The other is you go through engineering R&D, which is like you're going into high tech, and in high tech you're of course creating jobs for the most cream of the people in India, or people who are from a very educated class. So you need to have a mix of both. If you're looking at India with a 1.3 billion people, with almost 90% of the people in organized sector, I would be looking at also setting up industries, like we talked about smartphones, we talked about defense. So defense industry in this particular manner is going to come in, is like it's going to be setting up. When you set up, you need to have people in the blue collar workers to be will be working on the production floor. So that is in a way help India from getting jobs from the unorganized sector to the organized sector, or getting people jobs from the rural sector. So I hope I've answered that question. Kapil, was I able to answer your question on the defense sector? So let me come back to you on the education. So I've actually not gone in depth. So I don't want to comment on how the education, because since I've not read about it. So because the other question is predominantly national education policy and transfer of pie from organized. So need to be very specific here. How the education policy is going to be affecting the agriculture sector, I'll need to come back and I can put an email to you on this. So that is you could ask anything else if you would like to ask. Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. I really want to appreciate. Thank you for being there for the webinar. It's always good to have, and I want to personally thank Kapil and Amit. This was live, so you can actually see it on my channel. Sorry, on the startups channel, the Middle Road, the YouTube channel. So it's actually getting broadcasted live. I'll also be putting that on my platform. So I'll put both this version and the version which I'll be get recorded version from AMeet. So that's going to be playing across board on the platform for a couple of days. So thank you. I really appreciate for joining, and I hope I was able to clear all your doubts. And I wish you all the best. Have a great evening. Just be COVID-19 is still like going up in pretty much, the cases are rising exponentially in India, and I think we need to be just careful. So just be safe, and wish you all the very best for your families. Thank you.